So we're still in part 3, the War Convention, WC, and now we're in chapter 10. And I think I'll put a little chapter 10 one here. I'll be doing two videos on chapter 10. Chapter 10, War Against Civilians, Sieges and Blockades. Now, as the lead-in to this discussion, recall that in chapter 9, there were two principles of the War Convention. That you can attack once the hostilities have broken out. You can attack soldiers, right? They are liable to be in harm's way and to be attacked. And the other one was to never attack citizens. And that one, Walzer discussed, some modifications, some criticisms of it. And that led him into the discussion of double effect, which the doctrine of double effect, where you have an intention, you have foresight in that, citizens might be hurt, but your intention is not to hurt them, it's to achieve the military objective, and the putting citizens in harm's way or whatever, or non-combatants, we'll clarify this terminology a little bit later, is not part of the intention, right? It's outside of it. And then that had to be a little bit, that had to be corrected a little bit, and then he introduced this notion of a double intention. But now we're into when you start talking about citizens being kind of necessarily involved, like in a siege or whatever, the question becomes a little bit more complex. And Walzer says it becomes a little harder to assign blame. We've got to think about this a little more because there's kind of background conditions under which you start applying the doctrine of double effect. And he thinks that this just makes life a lot more complicated when you're talking about sieges and blockades, because you're asking questions like, well, if we have to be intentionally attacking citizens, like why are they there? Like, why are they in the battle zone to begin with? And that's really what you have. That's a siege. It's militarily necessary. You got to take a city. You're going to do something. There's civilians there. It's not like you're out on the like on the pitched battle at dawn and there's no citizens around, or you tell them to get off the field, or you pick a place where they aren't. You're involved in military activities that necessarily include, or may necessarily include, we have to work all this out, but civilians are there. So urban warfare, in other words. So the siege, and he thinks this is, this is pretty well one of the oldest and most horrific form of warfare. If you do look at the history of war, sieges are there throughout history. Cities under attack, and in a variety of ways for various purposes and whatnot. Is there some way to defend this, right? Or is it just, we say this is just all wrong? Walzer is looking into, can we defend this? Well, does military necessity demand that you instantly attack? No, you could deliberate. And as he said, it'd be easier and cheaper for the besieging army to just wait it out. And that has horrible consequences as well. But you could wait it out. He wants to look a little bit more at this. So he brings up in AD 72, the siege of Jerusalem, the Roman siege of Jerusalem, carried out by the general Titus, who went on to become one of the supposedly, quote unquote, one of the good emperors. He had a hand in completing the Colosseum. So his work is still around today. You go to the Colosseum in Rome, he had a hand in it. He didn't build it by himself, of course, but he was one of the emperors. I believe he helped to finish or complete the building. Anyways, Titus says something like this in some of the historical records. It's put into his mouths by, I think, Josephus, says that Titus claimed, well, it's not my doing. I'm really sad all those people in Jerusalem are dying. But, it's my job. I'm trying to, clean things up in this area and all that. And so he puts the siege on Jerusalem. He says, it's not my doing. Well, if it's not his doing, whose is it? And Walzer is working his way through a variety of possibilities and, entertaining them, then seeing their flaws, and then perhaps rejecting them. Well, okay, so if it's not Titus's responsibility, who is it? Who then? The city's leaders, whether civilian or military. You could say, well, they're holdouts, right? They should just surrender, and they're forcing the hand of the besiegers, right? Or you could say, well, the city's citizens, they agree with their leaders, and they're sort of all, and so that kind of is, they've abdicated. They're to leave or whatnot. They're going along with their leaders. Now, Walzer says this isn't really plausible because it turns the attackers kind of into automatons, right? Like where you could just say to Chinese, well, you're right, it's not up to you in any way, and that seems a bit ridiculous. So let's go back and consider the attackers. Let's assume that they offer some terms, right? Quarter, right? Usually no quarter meant, when you offer no quarter, you're not going to quarter the people that you're attacking. You're not going to house them or whatever. Basically, you're going to kill them. So, but if you offer quarter, it's like offering terms of surrender. If we assume that the surrender is refused, this might enable, incidental civilian deaths. You kind of have, again, the doctrine of double effect, but it doesn't make civilians direct objects of attack. Now we're going to look a little bit deeper at the quarter thing here, but basically, just because civilians simply refuse to leave, it doesn't automatically make them direct objects. But one defense of sieges is it might be that the attackers are not responsible for the inhabitants who are there voluntarily. Walzer doesn't quite think this works, but he does rework it in a more specific way that does flesh out this notion of voluntarily into a purely free choice. So truly consent. So he reworks it and goes something like this: if civilians truly consent to being in the city, can a siege be justified? In other words, can civilians under that situation be actually direct targets? And Walzer says yes, it can, in this sense, that they've been offered a free exit by the attackers. There's some, like a corridor or some way they've been permitted without punishment, without harassment or being attacked, that they can actually leave so that the military objective can be achieved. And if citizens are going to deliberately put themselves in the harm's way, then civilians, yes, they can be direct targets. So in that sense, it's morally permissible. But is it militarily? And what happens if you're talking about a larger thing than a city, like a country, for instance? Well, Walzer's going to discuss that, but I'll do that in the next video.